Hosted by two cocks and frocks. Shaka talk. She loves to roll. I love to rock. Shaka talk. We've hit the streets, been round that block. Shaka talk. My name is Dr. Rhea. Some people call me Fea. I've got something to say. Allow me just one prayer. Okay, suffer from a mental block. Shaka talk. Like, oh my God, and what the fuck? Shaka talk. Just turn it up and sit right back. Shaka talk.
There are women who are coming from within the ranks of working prostitutes who want to have prostitution decriminalized and who want to be able to form associations. Maybe not labor unions per se, but various types of associations for their own protection, for public health, and things of that nature. The existence of these groups is not welcomed by the radical feminists, because if such a group exists of women who are prostitutes who want to have labor rights, that's sort of evidence that they can't be slaves. I don't know of any time when we had slavery in this country when the slaves went out picketing. Slaves don't go on strike. They don't organize unions. That's not how it works. The fact is that there's no generalization. There's no typical prostitute, any more than there's a typical man or a typical woman or a typical John or a typical black person or a typical Republican. Nobody deserves to be put into a class that somebody else decides they can define and go forward with a prejudice in terms of everyone in that class. Everyone deserves to be treated as an individual and own their own truth about their own life and the problems and joys that they encounter.
What's up, everybody? That was the quote. Welcome to Shaka Talk. I just read a quote from our special guest today, Tracy Ryan, and she is an advocate for the rights of sex workers here and around the world. I'm Dr. Rhea, and let's see everybody now. Cool. Hey. This is my co-hostess, Edna, and our special guest, Tracy Ryan from Apple, Hawaii. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right on. Thank you for coming here. And so Apple, Hawaii, that stands for?
Arresting prostitutes is legal exploitation. And what that means is that we're focused on one specific area of harm that people suffer in the sex industry, which is the harm that's put upon them by working in an illegal industry. The harm of being arrested, the harm of having a prison record, the harm of going to prison, the harm of being harassed, and the difficulty in seeking redress for any type of abuse that may have been perpetrated upon you when you're illegal yourself. All these things fall within an area of abuse that people face in the sex industry, which should be easy for us to address. There's a lot of discussion in the community about prostitution and prostitutes being abused in various ways, but a lot of the people who are making this discussion are ignoring one of the most obvious and easy things we can do to address that, which is to decriminalize prostitution for the sex worker and for her customers.
Why do you think prostitution is illegal?
Well, there are a variety of different reasons why prostitution is illegal. People tend at this point to just assume that it's normal and natural for it to be illegal, like jaywalking or something that's just falls into a category. But throughout history, prostitution has been legal or tolerated much more often than it's been sanctioned. If you look at laws around the world and the way the sex industry is treated now and in the past, you'll find that the United States today is one of the most punitive countries in the world in terms of the way it deals with people working in this industry. There's rankings and evaluations that have been done internationally by sex worker advocacy groups, which put the United States in the same category as the People's Republic of China and Saudi Arabia. Even many Islamic countries, such as Bangladesh, treat people working in this industry with a lot more respect and tolerance than we do in our country.
Muslim nations treat hookers better than?
Bangladesh is
Wow.
a good example. Bangladesh has an organization of 3,000 sex workers who are operating primarily street professionals, and they represent over 12,000 other women. Now, many of these women are in difficult situations in Bangladesh, but they know that they have sisters who are organized, who are there to be a help to them. We can't have that in this country. In this country, all of the efforts to organize and to offer help and support for other people in the industry run the risk of being targeted by law enforcement. It's a much more negative situation here in the United States. Of course, it also varies from state to state.
Wasn't it legal in Hawaii at some point?
It was de facto
Why?
legal in Hawaii during the 1930s and up to September of 1944.
Wait, what is de facto?
De facto means that there's a law on the books, but even the police and the government ignore that law. So in fact, it's legal, even though there is a statute. What happened was, around World War I, there was a national effort funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Baptist Church, who was the agency involved in this, to investigate prostitution. And they came up with this idea that prostitutes were all being captured and kidnapped and held in slavery. This is the white slavery movement.
It's a lie. Okay.
And so during the 19-teens and into the 1920s, there was a great effort in the United States to close down brothels. Brothels had been open and pretty much tolerated widely across the Victorian period because they were seen as an outlet for male sexuality at a time when most good girls were expected to be virgins. During the 19-teens and 1920s, that attitude changed and prostitution became much more sanctioned. The brothels were closed down by the police, and the effects were that prostitutes turned more and more to other forms of encountering their customers. So street walking, which had been less common, became more common. Prostitution spread into different areas and within communities, and sometimes communities felt that they were more happy when it was in a district than it was in their own
All over
backyard.
the place.
Yeah, which is still an issue today. Yeah. Anytime you've got neighborhood groups where you've got a community, residential people, in the same area where you have visible prostitution, you tend to have a conflict.
Where was it de facto legal in Hawaii?
In Hawaii, starting in 1930, the determination was made that the closing of all the brothels, which had been centered in Iwilei up until about 1919, that act had been a mistake, that had made things worse. So the military police and the police got together and said, you know, we're going to invite the madams back.
Really?
We're going to say, oh, reopen your brothels, but we're going to keep them in a zone down in the River Street area. And so from 1930 to 1944, there were about 10 kind of legal brothels that were basically, they were run under the auspices of HPD. HPD set the rules. HPD set the rules for, you know, the working conditions and all sorts of other things. So it was really run by the police. It led to a certain amount of corruption and a certain amount of abuse of the women in the brothels. But the women were allowed to make a large amount of money, so the women would put up with a lot of the abuse. But it wasn't a situation that we would see as favorable today in terms of decriminalization because of the many rules that the police put in. And there was a racial impact so that a black man couldn't go into the brothel, for example.
Really?
Yeah. Local people,
this is-
black people, did not go to these brothels. The brothels service primarily white military.
The military?
White military, yeah.
I'll do any military but the white.
Well, the brothels operated from about 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Every day, 4 hours a day, and a woman would service about 100 men during that 4 hours.
Damn.
The men
my God.
paid $3 for a few minutes, and the brothel took $1, and the women get $2. So you start thinking about it. All right, well, she's doing 100 men, $2 per man. I won't say per head. $200 a day. $200 a day in the 1930s is an awful lot of money.
Yeah. That's a lot today.
It's an awful lot of
That's
money in the
one date, though,
1930s.
but-
So even though the women were working very hard and they had all these idiotic Menini restrictions placed on them by the police who set the rules, like you couldn't be seen in a better class of cafe, you couldn't have a boyfriend, you couldn't own a car, you couldn't go to Waikiki, you couldn't do this. All these things to keep these women away from the good class of women out in the community, to keep this separation, the good girls and the bad
And
girls.
the cops made these rules.
Cops made the rules, yeah.
Okay.
And in 1942, it became obvious that there was a lot of turnover because women would come, they'd work for a year, then they'd leave. It was very hard work, so they got their money, they went back to the mainland. 1942, they were stuck for the duration because the war was on. And so there was a strike. So prostitutes were actually out picketing in front of HPD headquarters
Really?
with signs for 3
let's do
weeks
it.
in 1942 in a strike to alleviate some of the stricter conditions. And the military got involved, and the military morale officers were very upset about this strike. They didn't
'Cause
like it at
it
all.
looked bad.
Yeah, and so actually it was under pressure from the military, who really had complete control, we're under martial law, that the police agreed to acquiesce to some of the demands that the sex workers had, and the strike was settled.